Folks, we continue our watch through of Project 2025 content. And of course, this video is titled The Administrative State. So we're going to learn about what that is, because apparently you can become a part of the Trump administration's plan to overturn democracy without even knowing what the administrative state is. So let's learn what they think incoming people need to know. And I'm excited. Thank you to ProPublica for publishing these, by the way. Amazing, amazing work on their part.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Paul Ray. I lead the Roe Institute at the Heritage Foundation, where we focus on economic, regulatory, and budget policy issues. Before joining Heritage, I led the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs in the Office of Management and Budget within the White House. OIRA, as my old office is abbreviated, is the Central White House Regulatory Office, charged with leading regulatory policy across the federal government. Today, I'm here to talk with you about regulations. Specifically, I'd like to talk about the administrative agencies that issue regulations and the challenges they present to our system of ordered liberty.
This guy almost certainly got untold numbers of wedgies as a kid. Like, you're both dorky looking and a Republican. You can't have that combo, bro.
My purpose is to diagnose some of the problems with the administrative state so you can work to change it in any future political position you may hold.
In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle.
In America, we understand that a nation is only living as long as it is striving.
A nation is only living as long as it's alive.
Only a few
That's right,
generations
folks.
have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger.
This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper.
Whether we go forward together with courage or turn back to policies that weakened our economy, diminished our leadership in the world, America's future will be in your hands.
Gee whiz, thanks, mister. I can't wait to have America's future in my hands. I'm gonna do
You may not
sick,
know it,
smutty
but
things
you have already
with it.
encountered dozens of regulations today. For example, the electricity you're using to watch this video comes to you through transmission regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. The emissions of the power plants that produce that electricity are regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency.
But we're gonna get rid of all that when we're in power, because we're Republicans and we hate both those things.
If you ate breakfast today, your food is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or both.
And you know what? We should get rid of all of those too. Under the Trump administration, we'll do our darndest to get rid of all that evil regulation.
If you have a job, your workplace is likely regulated by the Department of Labor. And if you're in school, the Department of Education
hate life
likely
and
has
you
a lot to
personally.
say about your educational
Yeah.
experience. Federal regulations touch every aspect of American life. Now, what is a regulation? At first glance, it may look like a law. Both laws and regulations command or prohibit some sort of action. Both usually include penalties for those who violate them. If you went down to the local library, you would find that even the books that contain regulations look like the books that contain the laws.
What?
So what's the difference? The difference is that laws are enacted by Congress, and regulations are issued by agencies. Now, as an aside, there is a third category in addition to laws and regulations. This is what we call guidance. Like regulations, guidance is issued by agencies. Unlike regulations, though, guidance doesn't carry penalties for violation. A guidance document is just an agency's advice about what to do. The problem is that regulated parties often really want to stay on the regulator's good side, so they do whatever agency guidance says. This means that even though guidance is not legally binding, It often has the same effect as a binding agency regulation.
Okay.
So what is an agency? It's an arm of the federal executive branch, the branch headed by the president. There are many, many agencies, ranging from the Department of Defense, with hundreds of thousands of civilian employees who ensure U.S. armed forces are prepared to defend the nation against armed foreign aggression, down to the tiny Presidio Trust, whose handful of employees preserve a single San Francisco area park. As my example of the Department of Defense shows, agencies do much more than just issue regulations. They also enforce the law, adjudicate cases, make loans and grants, conduct scientific research, manage public buildings and land, carry out foreign relations, conduct espionage, and anything else you can think of. Today, I'm going to talk just about—
Oh boy, I love government agencies that conduct espionage. That's not a gigantic red flag at all.
regulations. But you need to keep in mind that regulating is only one thing the agencies do, and their regulating interacts in important ways with their other activities. There are 19 agencies whose heads sit on the president's cabinet. These tend to be very large agencies with tens or hundreds of thousands of employees. There are also many other agencies whose heads do not sit on the cabinet. The most important of these are several commissions such as the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, and the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, which have extensive powers over particular sectors or issues. The president appoints the heads of agencies and commissions with the advice and consent of the Senate. The president can fire the heads of cabinet agencies whenever he wants, but Congress has enacted statutes that restrict his ability to fire the heads of many of the commissions. One of my colleagues will talk with you about the regulatory process. Here, I just want to note that agencies' regulatory authority comes from Congress. The agencies have only the authorities Congress gives them. Once Congress has given authority, someone must decide whether and how to exercise it. A decision about whether to issue a regulation, as well as about what that regulation will command or prohibit, can come from the agency or from the White House. It is likely to come from the agency if the regulation is run-of-the-mill and doesn't really raise important policy questions. It's likely to come from the White House if the regulation is high-profile or implicates one of the president's policy priorities or campaign promises. Decisions about the most important regulations are sometimes made by the president himself, often in executive orders. The exception—
These are mostly what you're going to be worrying about, folks, because we're not going to get much done with Congress, but we're basically going to be relying on the president to completely dissolve any decision-making apparatus Congress currently holds. Because the Supreme Court's given him supreme authority to basically do whatever he wants, and we just need you to rubber stamp it, okay? Shut up and do your job, honey.
The exception to all this is regulations by the independent commissions, which enjoy partial, though by no means total, protection from presidential oversight. Now, I'd like to conduct a thought experiment. I'd like to invite each of you to be an agency staffer for a day and ask you, why would you regulate? One reason is that you might see a problem that you think you can fix. Let's say, for instance, workplace dangers or consumer fraud. In my experience, this is a very common reason agencies regulate. Indeed, many people who work at agencies do so because they believe their agency can make an important difference in the world. So if you worked at an agency, you would probably be predisposed to see problems that you think you can fix using your agency's powers. At the same time, you would likely not have to live under the regulations you issued. For instance, if you worked at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, you would regulate farmers, but you would not yourself be a farmer. If you worked at the Food and Drug Administration, you would regulate pharmaceutical companies and, indirectly, the patients who use their drugs, but you would not be a pharma company worker, nor are you likely to use most of the drugs you regulate. For that reason, what counts as a problem in need of fixing may seem very different to you as an agency staffer than if you worked or lived under the regulations you issue. And the solutions you devise may not be the ones that those who live under the regulations would agree to. This is just because, as an agency staffer, you would be disposed to view your mission as the most important thing, even if the people don't view it that way. Let's say your job were preventing workplace accidents. If it were, you would probably be inclined toward regulations that prioritize workplace safety. But workers who live under workplace regulations don't value just safety. They also value the ease of doing their job and productivity for the sake of the jobs it creates. An agency tasked just with promoting workplace safety is unlikely to strike the same balance between safety and productivity that the people would. If you worked at an agency, another reason to regulate would be to further your own plans for the future. Usually, agency heads have ambitions. They want to be promoted to a more powerful agency, or elected to Congress, or appointed as a judge. And lower-level agency staff may want to make money in the private sector one day, and so need the approval of future private sector employers. Either way, if you worked at an agency, you might be tempted to issue regulations that pave the way for your future ambitions.
He really is one of those true believers in the mission types. Like, he's committed to this idea of, like, serving the Republican administration with such zeal that he's basically just telling you, you know, keep your head down, do your job. You know, keep in mind, people out there are gonna be watching you. And it's like, no, they're not. No, they're not. No, they're not. He's so profoundly evil, and I hate understanding everything he's saying. That's the thing, right? Like, that's what I've been saying through all of these videos. These people are like the epitome of the banality of evil. Like, they are just... They are seeking to be the bureaucrats that make the boring bureaucratic machinery work, while utterly destroying the concept of democracy or any kind of civil liberties you might have. And, like, the scariest part about him is that he could be anyone, you know? Like, you can imagine a lot of people being molded into this guy. You know, like, basically, if they can groom children into being this guy, that is 1000% what they will do. The Republicans. Yeah, it's fitting that we just watched an analog horror about skin changers, because this guy absolutely feels like one.
We all know from our own experience that when we want something for ourselves, it can be easy to convince ourselves that it's also the right thing to do for others. The point of this thought experiment is to show some ways in which the interests and perspectives of agency staff diverge from the interests and perspectives of the people who must live under the regulations they issue. I want to emphasize that my point is not that agency staff are up to no good. While there are bad apples at agencies as elsewhere, there are also many principled public servants who pass up lucrative opportunities in the private sector because they want to serve their country. Rather, my argument is that because agency staff often have interests and perspectives that differ from the people they regulate, they may, despite the best intentions, issue regulations that are not best for the people. Indeed, sometimes the agencies have interests opposite to those of the people. That's because the agencies get to enforce the rules they make, but the people must live under them. You may not be surprised to hear that agencies tend to value regulations that enhance their own power in one way or another, even when those regulations make it hard for people to live under them.
Gotta get rid of all those regulations, am I right? They're being too inconvenient, guys.
For example, agencies sometimes favor rules that are open-ended, and so preserve their enforcement options over rules that would provide clarity for people who live under them. For another example, agencies sometimes issue guidance that is functionally indistinguishable from regulations, but that, because it's technically guidance rather than a rule, cannot be challenged in court. This approach makes a lot of sense from an agency's perspective, because it saves the resources of the agency, which no longer has to go through the costly, full regulatory process, and also because agency guidance is much less likely to be challenged in court than is a regulation. The problem is that the lack of judicial review leaves the American people without a path to argue that the agency's demands are inconsistent with Congress's will as expressed in statute. The problem of mismatched incentives that I have described is similar to one of the concerns underlying the American Revolution. The colonists worried that the British Parliament had different or even opposite interests and perspectives from the colonists' own. Because the colonists could not vote for members of Parliament, The colonists reasoned that Parliament had no business taxing or making law for the colonies. Of course, Americans can no more vote for agency staff than American colonists could vote for members of Parliament. I think that state of affairs would have gravely concerned our founding fathers. Now, we do vote for the president, and the president exercises some control over agency regulations. That control is imperfect. The presidentially appointed leaders of an agency may wish...
Notice like the way he chooses his words. That control is imperfect. The implication being that if a person had complete control over the regulations, it would be perfect. You know, like this guy is fashy to his bones, dog.
wish to pursue their own
My father handed me his copy of National Review when I was 15. Oh my god.
policy preferences rather than the president's. An agency career staff may fail to follow the orders that their own leaders give. But even so, presidents have a variety of powerful ways to influence agency behavior, which is why presidents tend to get the regulations they want on the issues they care most about. But presidential control of agencies raises its own problems, which I want to highlight briefly. We can see what those problems are with another thought experiment. This time, you get to be president for a day. If you were the president, why would you direct agencies to regulate? The president's reasons are basically the same as the reasons of an agency head. Presidents often want to do the right thing, but they don't have to live under their own regulations. They also are ambitious. Although there are no higher jobs for them to be promoted to, they do want to be re-elected, or for their chosen successor to be elected if they're termed out, or for members of Congress from their party to be elected to further their policy agenda. It's tempting for any president to use his powers to achieve his ambitions, and this temptation can make it very easy for a president to believe that what he wants would also serve the best interests of the American people. In particular, presidents are tempted to persuade undecided...
This guy wants to be Agent Smith so bad. Kind of, but like, I don't think he wants to be Agent Smith. I think he just wants to, like, you know, he wants to be like the servitor that like brings about the new world, you know? Like that's the vibe I get from this guy.
Voters in swing states to vote for them by using regulations that benefit those voters at the expense of other Americans whose votes will not swing the election. The temptation to use government power to favor some citizens at the expense of others would have sounded very familiar to the founding generation. They called this behavior factionalism, and it was one of the primary concerns of founders like James Madison. Factionalism leads to tyranny by rendering some citizens mere instruments for the good of others, and it destabilizes any regime in which it finds a home, as citizens break into rival blocs with no reasons to cooperate. One of the founders' greatest innovations was a means of taming faction. As Madison explained in the famous Federalist 10, Americans pursue a staggeringly diverse array of economic, social, geographic, and political interests. The requirement that federal legislation pass a majority of the House and Senate therefore means that it must garner the support of Americans pursuing a wide variety of interests. Few measures of public policy can do that, mostly just those that advance interests that all Americans share or that appeal to Americans' shared sense of justice. The legislative process is designed to foster such measures rather than those that benefit some Americans at the expense of others. Now we can see why the president is able to engage in faction far more than can Congress as the founders conceived it. Unlike laws, which require the agreement of hundreds of legislators pursuing a wide variety of interests, regulations can be issued at the will of a single person, the president. He is therefore able to direct the issuance of regulations to help his supporters at the expense of his enemies in a way Congress cannot. And because dozens of agencies report to him, the president can balance interests across the country and across time in a way that Congress cannot. It is therefore much easier for him to assemble a suite of factious measures commanding majority support at minority expense. We've talked a bit about why federal regulations, whether chosen by agency staff or by the president, would have raised concerns with the American founders. The basic idea is that the regulations that the agency or the president choose are not the best ones for the American people. In the time remaining, I want to focus on another concern the regulatory regime raises,
like, when he talks about regulatory regime, what he wants to do is destroy that regime. He wants to destroy the regulations that we have built up over the course of lifetimes in order to make sure companies aren't dumping their toxic waste into your water supply. That make sure, like, apartment buildings don't collapse, like what happened in Florida. He wants to destroy every regulation that keeps you safe and basically bring about that anarcho-communist, sorry, did I say anarcho-communist? Anarcho-capitalist utopia. He wants, like, basically the Ayn Rand ideal. He just sounds like he's whining his party doesn't have full control over regulations. Yeah, but keep in mind, this entire project that was put together by the Heritage Foundation and all kinds of other Republican think tanks is basically designed to allow Donald Trump to destroy all these things. He is their wrecking ball that will destroy all the things he's talking about. And he thinks that's great.
One that has more to do with the way regulations are issued.
Actual ANCAP is even stupider. I mean, it isn't ANCAP theory. It is merely just, it's mostly just like what ANCAPs would be absolutely on board with.
And with their content. I'd like to begin by pointing to an ideal that most of us have. When we think about the kind of life we would most like to live, we think of some contribution that we can make to our communities. The kind of contribution varies. For some of us, it's serving in public office. For others, it's teaching or preaching. For still others, it's building a business that offers important goods or services to our neighbors. These things and others have something in common. They all consist in employing our initiative and our practical wisdom to make our communities better. The people we most admire, people like Abraham Lincoln and Winston Churchill, Billy Graham or Pope...
We aren't admiring Winston Churchill in this house. You know, he did kill millions of people on purpose in India because he was just under the impression that they could breed like rabbits and weren't actually people.
John Paul II, or maybe even our own parents, are people who devoted their lives to making an important difference in the lives of others, whether just a few or many. To find why this way of living appeals so strongly to us, I want to go back to two famous philosophers, Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. Aristotle famously observed that all reasonable human choices aim at what he called a being at work of some kind. The point of our decisions, if they are reasonable, is to lead to actions that are worthwhile for their own sake. And Thomas Aquinas pointed out that one activity worthwhile for its own sake is causing good in ourselves and the world around us. To work to bring goodness into existence is worth choosing. It's simply better to live this way, working for the good of ourselves, our friends and family, our neighbors and country and world, than not doing so. Causing goodness in ourselves and others through our own initiative and practical wisdom is something that makes human life worth living. It's a form of human thriving. We achieve this kind of thriving by deliberating and deciding about matters that affect us and our communities. Deliberation and decision are possibilities open to us by virtue of our possession of reason, the defining attribute of mankind that the founders had in mind when they said that all men are created equal. Now, we can deliberate and decide in many places, in our churches, schools, neighborhoods, and especially our families. We can also do it in our political communities, through holding office ourselves and through voting for the best.
We can also do it by doing a fascist coup of the government. January 6th 2.0, let's go.
Candidates for office.
That's what he's talking about here.
If you read Tocqueville's classic account of life in the early American Republic, you find that America was a society shot through with opportunities for ordinary men and women to deliberate and decide about their common affairs. In the first place, Tocqueville explains that there was very little administrative centralization in early America. Most government occurred at the local level, and local responsibilities were divided among a large number of officials and assemblies, which drew many people into public roles. The result was opportunities for many people to contribute to their communities by their own initiative and good judgment. These opportunities were not limited to government service. Tocqueville
he does have a cadence of speaking that lends like a certain inherent comedy, like he's trying to make a joke, like he's trying to do a bit. And I don't really know what to make of it. It is weird. I'll give you that. It is strange.
also explained that early Americans loved to assemble together to take on work they could not handle alone. Indeed, he even said that Americans had a science of association. Men and women would come together in religious and charitable associations, in business enterprises, and in groups of all other sorts to contribute to causes they believed in. They were able to do this because government at all levels was limited, leaving space for private people to take on important tasks. Now reflect on what happens under bureaucracy. When agencies or the president set policy on a question, no one else in the community gets the chance to contribute their initiative and wisdom to it. Their job is just to obey. They become mere cogs in a machine that carries out the decisions of others rather than deliberating and deciding for themselves. They are thus excluded from an important aspect of human thriving.
Yeah, but they're being hired to do the cogs in the machine. That's what they're being hired to do. Similar to what other people are hired to do at, like, companies and such. They're just being hired to do a job and be paid a wage and then go home. It's not supposed to be this, like, thing. They're supposed to get orders from elected officials who appoint people, and then those people hire people to do jobs. Like, this is not a venue for human thriving. This is a venue for getting a paycheck, and there is a crucial difference.
And that, I would suggest, is the most troubling effect of the regulatory regime.
Oh my God.
Over the last few minutes, we've seen a few problems that the federal regulatory system poses to the American tradition of ordered liberty. First, it allows rulemaking by agency staff who do not share the interests and perspectives of the people who must live under the rules they make. Second, it allows the president to engage in factionalism, pitting Americans against each other by using the regulatory system to favor some Americans over others. Third, it forecloses opportunities for Americans to thrive by contributing their initiative and practical wisdom to building up their communities. How we got here is mostly a topic for another day. Suffice it to say that while we have spent a lot of time talking about the federal executive today, the root of the problem lies with Congress, which is responsible for giving the agencies the broad powers they enjoy. To be sure, agencies in the White House often read those statutes for all they're worth. They try to exploit ambiguous provisions to increase their power. But the statutes are susceptible of these broad readings only because Congress writes them that way. And many statutes are basically void of content altogether, allowing the agencies to issue whatever rules they like. Nor have the courts helped. It's the courts that have allowed Congress to take on a vast number of tasks.
This is an awful lot of opinion here from a training video. Notice how, like, none of this was about actually doing a job? Like, not a single part of this was about doing a job?
Regulations are a disease, a cancer of this government. They're a plague, and we are the cure. This dude in Agent Smith voice.
Like, unironically, like, this video isn't training anyone.
Regulations are a disease, a cancer of this government. They're a plague, and we are the cure. This dude in Agent Smith voice.
Yeah, like, this guy is basically describing, you should hate regulations. You should hate regulations. When you get into office, you should hate regulations. Remember, it is your God-given duty. It is your God-given duty to destroy them, okay? You need to destroy them because they are the enemy of human flourishing itself. Which is a bit hyperbolic, I imagine. But, like, oh yeah, when I switch scenes, sometimes it double plays the audio. But, like, he thinks that, like, by allowing companies to drain poison into your local water supply, you're being a real hero for human flourishing, which is insane to me. But, like, he at no point in this video did he, like, describe anything that would be useful to an incoming official. All this video existed to do was to demonize regulations and try and convince the people who are coming in that they need to destroy those regulations.
Tasks beyond those...
Ordered liberty is just managed democracy with the words switched around. Wait, did he actually say like the phrase ordered liberty? I thought you guys might be memeing, because that didn't register to me, because yes, he did.
To issue whatever, and many statutes are basically void of content altogether. Provisions to increase their power for all they're worth. To be sure, agencies in the White House often read those statutes for all they're worth.
I have to be honest. I heard liberty. I didn't hear ordered liberty. He fully did? Jesus.
They try to exploit ambiguous...
This is what I get for watching without the subtitles on.
...provisions to increase their power. But the statutes are susceptible of these broad readings only because Congress writes them that way. And many statutes are basically void of content altogether, allowing the agencies to issue whatever rules they like. Nor have the courts helped.
Yeah, but by the way, this is how regulations are supposed to work. Like, these organizations that oversee different aspects of, like, regulatory business are supposed to have a certain amount of discretion to apply the regulations, because you cannot argue in court every single minutia of what they are or are not allowed to do. So they're generally given a broad purview, which is good. That's by design.
It's the courts that have allowed Congress to take on a vast number of tasks beyond those spelled out.
And yeah, they can now, GamerG, exactly. Thanks, Supreme Court.
In the Constitution. Congress can delegate so much power to the agencies because it has first annexed that power to itself in derogation of the Constitution's limits. Further, the courts often defer to agency interpretations of ambiguous statutes they administer, which is about like letting the fox guard the henhouse. So what's to be done? Well, the most serious reforms must come from Congress and the courts, which is where the trouble started. But executive officials can do some important things to remedy these problems with the administrative state. First, officials should be sure to adopt the perspective of the people when regulating. They should always ask, what would it be like to live and work under this regulation? Too often, regulations sacrifice clarity, stability, and other rule of law values to achieve the agency's own objectives more effectively. But officials who have the people's best interests at heart must remind themselves that Americans need to make plans if they are to be effective agents in their own lives. And the rule of law, in addition to each agency's own mission, must therefore loom large in the mind of regulators. Second, officials should hew carefully to the law when issuing regulations. This means sticking closely to both the substance of each agency's organic statute and the rulemaking procedures that Congress has enacted in the Administrative Procedure Act and elsewhere. By doing so, officials respect the will of the people as expressed through their elected representatives in Congress. Of course, sticking to the statute means accepting constraints on agency power. Sometimes these constraints will bar agencies from addressing real-world problems.
I can't tell you that he doesn't talk like
It's vital to remember that in such situations,
he absolutely does.
These often pressing problems are not all that's at issue. So too is the ability of the American people to govern themselves. Self-governance is a reality only if executive officials respect the people's decisions in the Constitution about where to vest the legislative power. Third, and relatedly, before issuing guidance documents, officials should ask whether the substance of the document they intend to issue is regulatory, that is, whether in substance it will tell the regulated public what they must or must not do. If so, then respect for the will of Congress as set forth in the Administrative Procedure Act means that the document should issue as a regulation rather than as guidance. Fourth, It can be tempting when in office to do favors for this or that special interest group. It is absolutely essential that each and every regulation serve the interests of the American people as a whole rather than special interests. Executive officials must not use their positions of power to engage in faction. By abstaining from doing favors for special interests, executive officials advance toward the goal charted by James Madison and other founders of a federal authority that respects the rights and interests of all Americans. Fifth, within the bounds of the law, executive appointees must carry out the decisions of the President about regulatory policy. Even though the President's democratic mandate is inferior to Congress's own, he is a far better channel for the people's deliberation and decision than are executive officials pursuing their own visions of good policy.
That is terrifying. That is a terrifying end to this video. Holy shit. We need to play that one more time.
Democratic mandate is inferior to Congress' regulatory policy. Even though the President's democratic mandate is inferior to Congress's own, he is a far better channel for the people's deliberation and decision than are executive officials pursuing their own visions of good policy. I hope this brief overview of the perils presented.
He literally ends by saying, by saying basically, in our flawed system, the president taking like dictatorial power over these regulatory agencies is a better avenue for what you actually want, even in lacking a democratic mechanism. That's crazy, bro. Oh man, he just straight up signs off by admitting what they want. This is like the end of the last video where they where they started laughing about like, yeah, well, only 4 years, haha. Like, these people are evil.
Presented by the administrative state equips you to do your part as a member of a future presidential administration. Thank you for watching.
Good God. Like, that was really difficult to watch for a number of different reasons, but like, I didn't hear him say ordered liberty. I did not hear him say the words ordered liberty in there. Said it like 3 times in that part we watched since I last asked when he said it, because I didn't hear it. God damn. No? Okay, good. I'm worried like my I have been streaming for over 12 hours, so maybe my mind's going a little bit, but like these guys are fascists. They're just fascists, guys. They are not here to do anything other than completely destroy the ability of government to do anything that actually helps you, and to hand over our democracy to a fascist who's pledged to be a dictator on day one, and who's being handed a plan to basically become that dictator in the form of Project 2025. He's trying to make the president having absolute power somehow sound more democratic. It's manipulative. Exactly, Delta Who. Exactly. Like, he's trying to normalize and sane wash a fascist takeover of our democratic and regulatory processes. It really does boil down to being that simple. God, dude. This stuff is chilling. This is what should keep you up at night. Project 2025. The Trump people have tried to downplay it, but it is really a true threat to the world. I would say that this is the plot to destroy the world in a nutshell. Thanks for joining me for that video, though. Hopefully knowing that helps. Get out the vote. Get knocking doors. Get phone banking. Get volunteering for campaigns. Get out there, folks. We need you.